Hey everybody, thanks for joining me here and thanks for checking out my podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and click the notification bell for new episodes. You can also find Shine Without Shame on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. My guest today is Sarah Lajeunesse. Sarah is an award-winning coach and speaker who helps humans heal the areas of shame in their lives that prevent them from experiencing a greater and richer quality of life that's possible. She's worked with 300 plus individuals spanning 7 different countries around the world, spoken to audiences in Canada, the US, and Europe, and has led and facilitated retreats, gatherings, and workshops that support humans to release the guilt, shame, and experiences from the past that keep them in unwanted or disempowering circumstances. From working with, speaking to, and supporting hundreds of individuals who range in age from their 20s to their 60s and in various phases and stages in their lives, Sarah's witnessed the long-term damage and detrimental impacts that the weight of shame can carry if left unaddressed, from the boardroom to the bedroom and everywhere in between. Sarah, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Tiff. I'm excited about this conversation.
Me too. I'm really interested to hear you speak more about the work you've been doing around shame. And I'm curious, like, why did you start working in this area? I know you've had other iterations professionally in other industries. Would you just share a little bit about your journey to getting to this work?
Yeah, absolutely. We were talking a bit before this, just my previous career was actually in professional sports. So I worked in the very male dominated industry of professional football, marketing, corporate partnerships and events from different CFL teams, the Football Hall of Fame. And that just brought me to a number of different kind of male dominated offices, we will say. And through my own journey of not feeling like I belonged, not feeling like I had a place there, not feeling like the model of leadership that I witnessed before me was something that was achievable or that really I fit into, I think that I started, I believe, like many of us do, trying to overcompensate in order to feel like I was enough. And so that set in motion incredibly long hours, well into the, 2 a.m., up at 5 a.m., get to the gym, do all the things, be there round the clock. And that led to a series of severe anxiety attacks, kind of declining health challenges, and one that ultimately left me sobbing, shaking, and vomiting on a yoga studio changing floor. And I'll never forget, the yoga instructor at the time, she helped me to the back and she's dabbing this wet washcloth on my face. And I kept on thinking, if this is what success looks like, if this is what it takes in this industry, I'll never cut it. And B, I won't even survive it. And so that set in motion, diving into the world and understanding the disadvantages I feel, or I don't like the word imposter, but the thoughts of women not belonging, or the disadvantages of women's advancement in the workplace and corporate settings, and entrepreneurship. And that just led me on this long, kind of winding path. I got my coaching certification, and what had started as initially kind of health and wellness and helping women to take time for themselves and focus on their self-care and all of that stuff, then turned into this bigger challenge of imposter, not really seeing representation, not feeling like you're belonging, and not necessarily having the confidence to use your voice in workplace settings where you don't necessarily see yourself in these top leadership positions. And that ultimately, and again, it kind of morphed and changed to realizing, even through my own work and working with women at the top of their game in certain industries, professional athletes, Olympic athletes, women in CEO positions, incredibly successful entrepreneurs, there was still an underlying thing that even if they had the money, the bank account, the position, the office, whatever it was, most of them could never be fully happy. And there was something that was preventing it, and so when I got to kind of the core of the issue, I realized that it doesn't matter what's going on in our external existence. There are certain things that add up over time, such as shame, guilt, experiences from our past, that lead us to believe either we don't belong, we're not worthy, we're not enough. And it's this constant striving of trying to prove oneself. And so, to answer your question in a very long-winded way, what started as, I think, essentially trying to solve surface level symptoms of, let's get more women in leadership positions, let's help women with their self-care, with their confidence, all that. It wasn't getting to the root of the issue of what prevents us from experiencing more joy, a sense of enoughness, a sense of worth and value at whatever stage they're at in their life. And that's what led me to the root of doing shame work. Long-winded way of answering your question, but that's how I got here.
But it's an important journey to include, in your experience, and then how that changed the way you probably looked at women in the workplace and in the environments you were finding yourself working in. So it makes sense that it takes a few minutes to explain that journey. I can appreciate that. And I wonder if, so primarily your clients are women, or completely, is that?
It started that way. And then, I don't know how much you checked out my website or my work. I do something called a soul session. I kick off all of my coaching work with a full kind of highly focused, highly intensive day with a client, where we get to kind of the root of some of the belief systems that have been building over time that I believe really prevent people from moving forward and actually obtaining or creating the change that they want to make in their life. And what was so interesting in that work, people were making progress, or women were making progress, and they were using their voice, or they were, believing, they were claiming their worth, and they were running into then conflict within other relationships in their life, because the new version that they were stepping into maybe wasn't fully understood by other relationships in their life. And so what started as a chance encounter where someone was like, hey, can you work with my husband? Can you work with my partner? To then suddenly actually having men reaching out and say, hey, women aren't the only people that experience shame here. It started to kind of take on a mind of its own. So about a third of my clientele actually are men. So yes, I've realized that shame does not discriminate. It impacts every single human being. It's the reason world wars are created. It's the reason divorce is what it is. Affairs are what it is. It prevents our ability to actually have healthy communication in a relationship. And men obviously are a fundamental component of that. And I would argue have even less space or less encouragement to discuss and to work through and to heal those areas. So anyone and everyone who wants to heal their shame is who I will work with.
Yes, I appreciate that. I just wanted to clarify so the audience would know that you are working with men, because I was then going to ask or say, I wonder what you notice about men and women in terms of dealing with their shame, and if men, as you are offering the safe space for men to explore shame, do you find that it's just as prevalent that men experience shame in many areas of their lives as it is for women, or is it the same? Is it equal? What have you become aware of in terms of who's experiencing shame, and on what kind of levels is it impacting them?
Totally. And you said it in my bio, right? I've seen how just the long-term damage that shame can cause multiple areas in our lives. And so what I often see with men is there just isn't necessarily a word to describe what their feelings are. It can start to foster and build up and to culminate into anger and rage. And we just don't necessarily have, or they have never been taught, or again, provided a safe space to work through and understand that there's an under root or an kind of layer cause of shame. Sometimes guilt is a close little brother, but shame is really, the root. I firmly believe that it leads to violence. A lot of what we see in the world, whether it's anger, rage, hate, violence, much of it stems from an internal shame. This idea, whatever you want to call it, the story someone has in their of themselves, it impacts absolutely everything. So yeah, that is more so what I see from the side of men. And that can go to anger, it can go to, with women, what I see more so is resentment, a sense of not feeling valued, appreciated, acknowledged. It can turn into resentment, anger, control. It affects each of us very differently. But yes, I don't know if that answered your question.
Oh, yes. Yes, it did. I just was curious about the idea of shame. I mean, to me, it's unfortunately an equal opportunity, quality or experience. It's not something that, men maybe experience more than women. I mean, shame is really about, and I always want to define it every once in a while here on the podcast, 'cause I know there are times where I don't maybe give an operational definition and just kind of assume that people have been listening or watching, but we can do that again today. And you can add to the language that I'm going to say, because I'm not a shame expert, but I understand that guilt is really more about kind of an external behavior and feeling badly, maybe about something that you've done, maybe just feeling not that you're bad, but oh, okay, that wasn't a great thing that I did. So it's kind of an acknowledgement, and it gets processed sort of maybe more externally. But shame is something that is processed, my understanding, more of on an internal level, deeper level. It becomes a belief about who we are. We may think that we're bad. We did something bad, and therefore we are bad, or we went through an experience that was negative or traumatic, but we maybe believe that we are truly a reflection or even the cause of something negative happening to us. Like, it's much more a deeper personal internal level. That's my way of articulating it. Please add to that, just so we can make sure that the audience is clear.
Yeah. And great point. And what I find is, between, and I think that's an accurate description of what you're describing. And what I found is, whether it's shame, whether it's guilt, shame is more heavy. But guilt, like I said, it's kind of a close cousin, a close brother, in terms of this lack of self-worth. It can lead to a lack of self-worth that one has of themselves. So I'll share a quick story. There's a woman who reached out to me, and she, when she was in, I think it was junior high, grade 7 or 8, she wanted a dress, a $32 dress. She's racking her parents won't buy it for her. She's racking her brains. How do I figure this out? So she did at the time what she thought any logical child would. I got to figure out how to get this $32. So she made the decision of stealing her friend's mother's engagement ring. So at the time, okay, this will just be, I can take this to a pawn shop. I can do this. We're going to call her Lucy. And so Lucy, overridden with guilt, right? Just so much guilt. She's storing this. At the time she reached out to me, she had been holding on to this ring for 12 years of her life. She'd been carrying it around from house to house, home to home, city to city. It lived as a constant reminder of what a horrible person she was. She wasn't worthy and deserving of real friendship. She wasn't deserving of trust. She wasn't deserving of wonderful relationships. So she had built this story over time and kept this as a constant reminder. So she comes over to me and she's okay. When we talk about what are these areas of guilt and shame, because what I truly believe is they may not be monumental, life altering decisions or choices like stealing someone's family heirloom. But they're incremental things that can add up and lead up to a time in which we get so far off center, so far off of who we are and what we believe in ourselves in terms of our confidence, our self-esteem, our self-worth, all of that, where the most common phrase that I hear from clients is, how did I get so far off center? I have no idea how I got to this place in this relationship, in this work, in my career, whatever it is. So she says, gosh, I know what you're going to make me do. I'm like, I'm not going to make you do anything. I'm not going to tell you what to do, what not to do. I stand for truth. I stand for courage. I stand for personal integrity, personal responsibility. You make the decision. There's a reason that you've held on to this. There's a reason that you never actually took it to the pawn shop. So she books a flight to go back to where she's from. She goes and talks to her friend that she hasn't spoken to in years because of obvious reasons. She's overrun with guilt. She actually lost that friendship. And she asked this woman, she's telling me at the time she had a little plastic bag. It's like a little doggy bag, right? So she goes to the woman's house and she's like, this is what happened. I'm so ashamed. I'm not here to ask for your free. I just want to know. I wanted to tell you this is what happened and I have to go return this to your mother. And so the woman's in shock and she doesn't know what to, and she's like, okay, well, just called my mom. I'll let you know. Like, she's there. She has no idea why you're coming, but good luck. And so she's on the phone with me driving to, back to this woman's house and she's sweating. She's like, Sarah, I could get punched. What if she punches me? What if she calls the cops and I'll personally bail you out, but unlikely to happen. Right. And she said, okay, I'm sweating, I'm shaking, whatever. She goes to the door and she has this little doggy bag, her doggy bag of her ring. And she goes to the door and this woman comes out and she says, hey, I know I haven't seen you in years. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm here to bring you something that I took so many years ago. And I'm just here to tell you, I can't tell you how sorry I am for the pain that this caused you. And the woman's looking, she's like, this little doggy bag. And she bursts out crying. And then she bursts out laughing. And she's like, oh my gosh, we blame the neighbor's kid. I stopped letting my daughter hang out with all of this stuff. She wraps her in a big bear hug. And she's like, my day just got so much better. Thank you. And she goes on her way. The woman feels incredibly liberated. She feels like, and again, it's not necessarily about the reaction that you will, because some people could be incredibly obviously upset with that, not give you the same grace. But that was a little reminder, whether it is guilt or shame. Guilt, it's something that you feel that you have done to someone that has caused harm. Shame, that can often be something, and just like you said, it's our story of I'm a bad person, I'm unworthy, I'm undeserving, but it is often rooted in creating harm towards someone else. Shame is often having something harmful done to you as well. So that was again a story that more so I just wanted to portray that it doesn't matter what I have seen, guilt and shame, it can cause the same detrimental damage. But to the point, this woman was sabotaging and distancing friendships, relationships, her ability to trust and to receive loving and open and trustworthy relationships in return because of this idea of what a horrible person she was, over a decade ago.
It's powerful. It is very powerful. It's a wonderful anecdote. And I appreciate it also in terms of your emphasis on whether it's guilt or shame there, especially if it's a long time festering or, just sort of sitting with us, it can end up creating a sense of not feeling worthy. And the sabotage part is interesting. In my work, I focus part of my work on the chakra system, and I won't go into great detail about that, except that the solar plexus chakra, which is just below the breastplate, is where we kind of harbor, but where we harbor anxiety, self-doubt, lack of self-worth. It's also where our confidence, our personal power, our faith, our will, our inner light resides. So when that light isn't as bright, or when something happens, we have an experience where we do lose confidence, or we start to doubt ourselves as time goes on. If it doesn't get addressed, it is interesting how sabotage comes in to the picture, because it starts to become this belief, well, if I'm not worthy, that's my reality, that's my truth, and I'm just going to live according to that reality and truth. And subconsciously, unfortunately, that does often lead to sabotaging relationships or opportunities. It's powerful. So I just wanted to acknowledge, from that paradigm, I understand what what's going on when you say, that really at the end of the day, self-worth and the lack thereof, it can be a balancing act sometimes. And some experiences are just, they aren't maybe as heavy as the one you described in your story. But if over time we don't address these experiences or these feelings, I think that seems to be when shame and that feeling of, just unworthiness really does start to build. Which is why I wonder what you think of this. I find that accountability becomes a really important quality to tap into. In the story you just shared, accountability was a part of that process on the part of your client,
Mhm.
and maybe also on the part of the recipient, uh, who your client met with. But I think that accountability is something that is so important, because it not only is it about us holding ourselves accountable, taking responsibility for our behaviors and our actions. Sometimes I find, even in my personal life, but also when I've spoken to others, it also helps us get clear about what we are responsible for and what we're not responsible for. To me, that's also where accountability comes in to the process. And I've spoken about this several times on the podcast with different guests, how that really can be one of the pieces to, in my experience, to working through this heavy shame. I mean, there's a lot of other healing and other steps maybe that even come before accountability. But I wonder what you think about that in terms of your work.
Mm, yeah, I love this point. And from what I have witnessed, is it is a fundamental piece. It is the most important piece to actually create the container in which someone can heal. And it's something I even have on my questionnaire. It's something it is the very first thing I look for before I say yes to any, working with anyone who reaches out to me, is I look for a worldview or a desire or an urgency or a willingness to actually create that desired change. Um, because again, you can think of the two key things is a willingness and an ability to do so. Some people have, the ability. I've worked with millionaires before. They have the ability, they have the money, but they don't have time. I don't want to do that. There's no way, an 8-hour day, Sarah, that sounds like a lot. I just don't have the time to take that off. Other people say, I don't know if I could even sit through a whole, like I would have to really discuss them. And so again, there's the fundamental piece is willingness. You hear that expression, you can lead a horse to the well, you can't make him drink it, sort of thing. The idea of healing sounds really, really nice, but unless people actually have that desire and a willingness to do whatever it is that it will take to actually heal that, there will not actually be that container of shifting. And I've seen that time and time again, where there are some people where I have had to let go. There are some people I've said, I'm going to refund the unused portions of your and I'm going to step back. It has become out of integrity to continue to take this money when I do not necessarily see the shifts that you were actually, or the personal accountability, like you said, in making that change. I'm not here to be your girlfriend and have like girl chats, right? It's this takes courage. It took her. I didn't tell the woman to go return the ring. It took incredible, like you said, personal accountability, personal integrity, and courage to do one of the hardest things she's ever done in her life.
So why do you think, I know you've just described that, when you are working with people who aren't able to get to a place where they're willing to do the
Yes.
work or willing to say, I'll I'll take this step. Why do you think, and there could be many reasons, but do you think that it boils down to one main reason why people aren't willing to do the work to deal with the shame or these feelings, these deep-seated feelings that are impacting their lives?
Yeah, great question. I don't know if there's one main reason. I think we can't it could be too challenging for people. It could be too dark for people to revisit certain chapters in their life. It could, like I said, it could be the time, it could be the discomfort. I work with a guy, I've been working with him for 5 years, made massive strides in his life. He comes from a paradigm in which dysfunctional relationships are a norm, are acceptable. That's familiar. He's seen it with his parents. He saw incredible, it was an icon of a man was his dad in a professional sports arena. And people just looked up to him, and he was so and everyone just loved the guy. Behind closed doors, he was incredibly abusive. So this young boy, he grew up with this confusion of, okay, well, this is celebrated in this world, but behind closed doors, you can be abusive to your wife, you can be abusive to the kids, you can do all of this stuff. He has had decades of consistently dysfunctional relationships, to the point where now it has, by excavating these old stories, the shame, the guilt, everything else, it just dawned on him one day. He's like, geez, Sarah, I just woke up to this fact that, like, this is what's normal. This is what's comfortable. And so he's been with this woman for, 12 years, loves the woman. However, there's no surprise that their previous paradigm, or understanding their previous norm in relationships, is one that is dysfunctional. So now he's shifting his story of, well, actually, I believe loving and trusting and connected and open communication relationships are possible, even though I've never witnessed this before. She is not yet there. And so, he's trying, well, should we go, or do you want to do any work? Like, what do you want to do? And she said, I don't even think I could last 2 hours in that. I don't even think I could do that. And there's so much, again, shame and so we all have shadows, right? She has a lot of stuff in her history that it's too dark. She doesn't want to go there. She's spent years, and there's no judgment, right? It's, I have one job. It's, if someone has a willingness or a desire to change, that we were going back to, whether it's male, female, non-binary, or whatever. If you have a desire, a willingness to shift, wonderful, game on. But without that, it's not the right container.
I think that it is such a challenging journey to walk, in that you are often having to face painful, traumatic memories and feelings. I've shared this before, when I started meditating a few years ago, I loathed it. I brought in a meditation teacher to the company where I was working at the time, and they taught classes and I participated. I had done meditating on and off in the past, but this was the first time, I think, in my life, yes, when I was making it a regular practice. Sarah, I loathed it so much. The reason why is because I would go through the process of sitting, getting the breath on, even going inside. And every time I would meditate in the beginning of this journey, I felt anxious. My heart would race. I felt stressed. I wasn't relaxed. And I would tell my colleagues this was at work. We were doing these classes again. And one of my colleagues said, "What are you doing? I don't think you're doing this wrong. It's supposed to be peaceful. It's supposed to be relaxing." And I started to speak to other meditation experts, or people who had a lot of experience. And I spoke to that teacher as well, but I wanted to get other perspectives. So what I learned is that for some people, and maybe for more people than we realize, meditation actually is a way people switch off, shut down, check out of focusing on what's going on inside. And I think I was experiencing, I had no clue. I just was like, this is too much. I was just actually getting really quiet, and I was going inward. It wasn't that I knew what I was doing, so to speak, but I was getting in touch with my internal environment. And there were memories and feelings that I was bumping into. And I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that was there. Gosh, I hadn't thought about that in a long time. And so as I started to understand more clearly what was going on, and this was just kind of a bump in the road, it wasn't going to be the way the experience of meditation was going to be for me forever. I started to relax a bit. And I started to also just take out, it's like going into a dark place with a flashlight. It's scary. You don't know what you're going to find. But then as you start to get acquainted, you start to get familiar with the environment and get more comfortable. You're like, oh, this old thing. Oh, I don't need that anymore. Let me just, like, if you're in a closet, so to say, you just throw that out. Well, I had to kind of, I had to work through that so I could get to a place where it was comfortable to sit. This is just one example. And I know that for a lot of people, meditation may be something that where you're supposed to be just peaceful, relaxed, right? Calm, clear your mind. That's fine. And that's completely a part of meditation. But I think what I was doing without knowing it, I was trying to go deeper into the process. It did bring up painful memories and painful feelings. And what you were explaining when I asked the question, why do you think some people, or why do you think it is scary for so many people? I think that it's too painful sometimes to relive that memory or those memories and those feelings that people just can't, they just nope. And understandably, I mean, some people have been through such horrific traumas. Of course, you would need help. You would need a lot of work and guidance and support to even start to peek in to that dark closet. So I'm just sharing that from the standpoint of what meditation taught me. And I imagine it applies to other areas of life, whether you're meditating or not, but just that idea of it being sometimes just too scary to face that pain. So we run away, we check out, we shut down. And I'm not saying that's everyone's challenge, but I wonder if that is more the challenge, more often than not the challenge.
Yeah, and such a great point. And again, when you're talking about topics like shame and guilt, it can also bring up not even just uncomfortable memories that perhaps you've tried to avoid. Perhaps, it's there's actually been a psychological defense mechanism to protect you, like you're saying, from traumatic experiences. But what I found, and I saw even just looking at the work that you do, a key piece is non-judgmental, is being non-judgmental. And there's so many people who are in containers and relationships and environments in which having a safe and or judgmental free space just doesn't exist, right? Another, it's not as long as my other story, but this one's a good one. This woman, she calls me one morning and she's whispering, she's like, Sarah, I just did the walk of shame. And I was like, sorry, you did what? She's like, the walk of shame. And she's mortified. She's been in long-term relationships for her whole life, two to be exact. But this time she had some drink. She went out partying. She's wearing these, 5-inch stilettos, this tight, beautiful little dress. And, things went, they went pretty well. Things carried on. She met someone great. Okay. She calls me out and she's like, oh, I'm so embarrassed. And she's like, I'm, SLUT. And she's having all these horrible names for herself and all this shame, this guilt. She doesn't even want to go here. And so many women carry this story from this experience or to this experience to this person saw my foot or, whatever it is of, this idea of what women are when they allow themselves to experience pleasure. The key, fundamental, two of the top things that contribute to women's shame and guilt, excuse me, are finances and sex. Finances and intimacy is what I have witnessed. And so this one, she's telling me, and she has all of these ideas, all of these names for herself. And, I have another client who that's her typical Thursday night. She loves it. She meets new people. She has fun. She calls her Sarah. You won't believe these new moves that, no, I don't want to hear any, but it's just like the shame, it comes from our perception of, okay, well, at what point does suddenly you become an SLUT? Is it at 12 men? Is it at 13 men? Is it one person? There's zero shame and she enjoys it. It's her pleasure. She loves it. It's her Thursday night. The other experiences it one time, one night stand, and she's overcome with shame. So, going back to your question or going back to your point, yes, it's the darkness, it's things we don't want to go to, but it's also things that in our mind we have perceived over time as something to be ashamed of. You don't speak of this. You're not supposed to feel pleasure. You're not supposed to have a one night or do X, Y, Z. And so what I have witnessed is sometimes it's shame and it's guilt that's completely unnecessary. It's just based on the container in which we were raised and our perception of, do we talk about money? Are we allowed to talk about money? Are we allowed to talk about pleasure? Are we allowed to talk about, X, Y, Z? And if so, that builds up like layers of an onion to a point in which, I'm unworthy, I'm undeserving, I'm bad, I'm wrong, X, Y, Z. So it can be for a multitude of reasons. And some people don't want to go there based on how heavy their programming was.
That's an important aspect. I appreciate you bringing that piece into the picture, because it's true. There's almost like a societal shame programming or culture that we all tap into that may or may not be always based on truth. And so that is important, absolutely, to keep that in our consciousness as, okay, ask ourselves, is this really something that I should feel badly about, or is this something society has told me to feel badly about? That is an important point to make, for sure. And yes, I'm sure that also is a part of the not wanting to face things. Absolutely. And you said something interesting in the beginning. Well, you said many interesting things, but one thing that stood out.
Long stories, Tiff.
They're wonderful. They help people understand, and to relate. So it's important to share them. And this idea of wars being fought, these massive sort of more on the collective, global, or just on a bigger stage of life, these atrocities or, these acts of violence or aggression that you were alluding to. In your opinion, you said shame was at the heart of
Fundamental piece of it, yeah.
Of that. Would you say a bit more?
Yep,
Expand on that, please.
Like I said, shame does not discriminate. It impacts everyone. World War II caused by, essentially Germany had lost their self-esteem through the Versailles Treaty, lost our sense of self-esteem, again, rooted in shame. It's a fundamental piece. When you see so much acts of violence and terrorism and this, that, and the other thing, it comes from, an author, Dr. David Hawkins. He has a scale of consciousness, essentially, where he talks about at the lowest levels of human consciousness are the emotions of shame and guilt. Shame is at the very bottom level. And in this state, your worldview, your view of yourself, your view of the world, your view of other people, everything around you is one of anger, of vengeful, of loathing, of hatred, of evil. And what ultimately transpires from that is destruction of yourself. That can be anything from harming yourself. That can be harming animals. That can be harming, when it starts to really progress, starts to harm other people. And so when we lose our sense of self, when we don't have healthy self-esteem, when our life has been kind of, our sense of self has been directed from a sense of shame, it will eventually manifest into something. So, I see, like I mentioned, through a number of men that I work with, especially men that come from a sports background, professional sports background, based on what they experienced, perhaps something traumatic in the locker room, potentially, abuse in their childhood home, when they don't actually have the space to work through and to heal some of these things, to understand you're not wrong, you're not bad. This isn't a source of shame. This is an unspeakable thing that happened to you. We cannot control the past, but what we can do is provide a safe and supportive and judgment-free space in which you can work through and heal and understand that you are not bad or wrong as a result of what was done to you. Without that, what happens is rage, anger, resentment of the world, resentment of the injustice, resentment of everything, and it has to come out somehow. And again, it can be as much as or as much or as little as rage in the household, violence in the household, violence taken out on other people, or anger in a boardroom, whatever it looks like, but it will come out. And I don't even remember what your question was. Um,
You answered, yeah, you've been answering it. I just wanted to hear you say more about the
shame, how
source
it,
of
yeah,
these larger atrocities in the world.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I do firmly believe it's at the root of pain, suffering, anger towards the world. When we are healed, when we are, and healed is an interesting word, when we are on our journey of healing, when we come from a place in which we feel whole and enough and have this healthy self-esteem, you cannot help but want to care and love for others. In a place of anger and shame and loathing and not enoughness, you do not have the capacity to love from a healthy self-esteem. Your love will be, or will come from, a source of manipulation or from self-gain, or what can I get out of this in order for me to give this in return. So, I truly do believe that, I don't know if it was Mother Teresa or whoever said about, sweep your own doorstep first. And I think there's so many people in the world that have such big, grandiose, beautiful visions of what they want to contribute, but they're not doing the work internally, or they're not focusing on their own. And that is the most important thing. If everyone was focused on, okay, how can I clean up, the old shadows, or the old stories, or the old belief systems I have, just the old gunk from the past, that starts to shift into more beautiful and healthy relationships at home. We start to pass that on to our children. That starts to seep into our communities. Everything starts with that internal focus on ourself.
That's so well said. It makes me also think, Sarah, that it seems like this idea, what you're describing, when you do your work, when you are whole and as healthy as you can be, or at least on that journey, everything in life's a little sweeter. Everything in life's a little brighter. There's more love. There's more openness to love. It seems like this is slowly but surely becoming seen, I guess, boiling it down to the work of healing. And that's just the easiest way to say it. That this is becoming more seen as more valuable by the greater society, by the masculine culture. It's like we haven't fully embraced it collectively, but I think that, like, to your point, it doesn't go away. You can stuff these painful feelings or experiences deep down as long and as far down as you want, and for as long as you can. It's going to manifest. It's going to bite you, to put it in that vernacular. It's going to come back to bite you, or it's going to disrupt your life. And then if that is happening to many, many people's large scales across the world, I mean, that is going to cause so many, and it does cause so many imbalances and dysfunctional relationships, and just systems and environments and cultures. It seems like we're going to have to just at some point accept, as a species, that this is an important part of our evolution. And when I mean evolution, I do mean materially, but I also mean spiritually, or on a level that is not just about what's tangible, but about those relationships, the love, the joy, the justice, um, the unity, that real sense that we're all in this together, even if we all have our own kind of desires and dreams. That collective feeling is an important part of our evolution, in my estimation. And I think up until, very recently, in terms of our species existence, it's just been about surviving. And it's even more recently been about, like, I gotta take care of me. I'm gonna do me. How do I get ahead? It's just hustle, 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 and all about, like, what what can I do to be I guess to be successful and to make my mark on the world. And in and of itself, that there's nothing bad about wanting to be successful or making your mark. But when you do that, when you do that at the expense of stepping on people or, pushing people away or just not opening the door for other people to come in to maybe the same opportunities, it just, I just feel like that's not sustainable. And that's not going to feed someone in terms of feeling good about themselves. Now, whether they address that feeling good about themselves or not, I guess that's where we're at right now, in our conversation. It's like, I just feel like that has to get addressed on some level. And I think more and more people are open to doing the work, doing the healing, repairing whatever they need to in their lives from their past so that they can have better, healthy relationships. And for some people, that could be a lifetime of work, depending on the history.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm saying, I think this is becoming more part of our consciousness. This work is important. And I hope that it becomes more and more a part of our consciousness every day. And I think understanding how things can be better when you heal is so important. That's why your stories are really powerful, but also it serves as a reminder of like, oh yes, that's right. There's something innate in us that knows we don't want to feel bad. Nobody wants to walk around the planet feeling awful. Oh yeah, this is a reminder. I don't have to feel awful. If I take some steps, I can lighten my load. I can lighten the burden. So I say that because I'm hopeful that will become more valuable. And I think it is, little by little.
Yeah. And you said so many points. I was just making a note of them, but it's a fundamental shift in our paradigm, right? Of what life can look like, what our experience, what our quality of life can look like. My grandparents, my great grandparents, I can imagine there were no discussions of, higher consciousness and healing oneself and how, get in touch with the self and, all those things. My grandma was, beautiful, beautiful woman, brilliant woman, valedictorian, prom queen, the whole thing. She was schizophrenic and bipolar. Their method of treatment were continuous shock treatments until she could no longer talk or function. That was our process of healing. We skirted over the fact of, inhumane treatment when she was little and horrible traumatic events of when she was little. There was no, let's heal the root cause. Instead, let's focus on the surface level symptom. You're bipolar. Okay, like, and again, I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not going to speak to the proper treatments of bipolar versus schizophrenic versus whatever. But we did not. Yes, you're right. There's a window of opportunity. There is a new kind of normalization. There's a new openness or willingness to focus inwards and to look at healing. And it is before there was, and we see it even with older generations who stay in career paths for 40, 50 years until retirement, even if it's a means to an end. There's a different level now I'm finding of, even though this is the way that things have been done in the past, it doesn't mean that something so much more beautiful or richer quality of life isn't possible. And so people are starting to explore that. And the other thing that you said, I think is so important when you talk about, yes, there's a willingness, is living from an empowered state has a cost. And I think that's the other thing that can get, that can dissuade, oftentimes the reason that people don't necessarily want to continue a journey or to dive into this work isn't necessarily about the money or the investment side of things. But it's what will I lose, or this thought of who will I lose? What will I lose? What part of myself will I lose if I have to actually choose? And like you said, have that personal responsibility and consciously choose a more empowered state of being. This gentleman who's in a relationship for 12 years, he may have to, because in the current container beyond the point that these two met and they provided each other a wonderful purpose for the time, there is an evolution of him in which he will no longer accept being in a relationship in which his self-worth is constantly questioned and not believed. So he may lose. Again, it's not for me to decide. My goal is to keep people together. My goal is to strengthen relationships, not to tear them apart. But if one person is not willing to go on that journey with someone else, which can very often be the case, there may be people that we lose. It can be very, going and returning a ring, having these difficult conversations, courageous conversations, living for, it sometimes can feel a heck of a lot easier not living a conscious existence. So that was just also a point that I wanted to touch on, is it living and choosing a more empowered state can come at a loss of certain parts of yourself that you may have to choose to outgrow.
Yes. It's important that we keep underlining and emphasizing these ideas and these thoughts, because I don't want it to be too complicated for people. I don't want the healing journey to be so overwhelming that you just even thinking about what is it that I'm embarking on? What is it that I'm going to get out of it? And if it just seems like just something that is impossible or if people feel like what it takes they don't have, it's not helpful. So I think the kind of conversation we're having and similar conversations where it's just breaking down simple process or simple steps, or the simple steps maybe to get to a place of starting that journey or continuing on the journey. I think that it's valuable, invaluable, maybe even because, and not not being judgmental is I think a huge piece to the recipe. I just want it to be as easy for people to embark on the journey as possible. And I do think that knowing that you have what it takes, knowing that you are born, or like inherently you have what it takes in terms of the foundation, the basics, to do the work of healing, to take that journey, is important. Yes, there are tools and there's expertise and there's processes that can help facilitate a person's journey, make it easier, make it clearer, or allow them to take certain steps, to be accountable or acknowledge or make different decisions. And I think that's what you're doing in your work. That's what I hope to be doing and offering always in my work. But I want people to know that it doesn't have to be complicated. It's complicated in dealing with your history. It always is. That's just inevitable in terms of being a human. Our history, our personal history and our collective history is complicated. But the work, we all have what it takes to do the work in terms of the core of what we need. We've talked about some of those qualities already, and the willingness, of course. And so I want to just make that clear in terms of where I'm coming from here on this podcast and anything I do, is let's not make this harder than it needs to be. And let's remind people, you've got what you need. Mm-hmm. Just maybe you need to, supplement some tools and some resources. That's fine. But I want people to feel they can do this without feeling that they're overwhelmed and that they don't have what it takes. It's like, no, you were born to have what it takes. That's the way I think about the world and about what we're doing here on this planet. I'm wondering if you want to share just any insights or words of encouragement or any steps that you think people who are listening or watching and who aren't sure if they know what they want to do next in terms of their work, or they're addressing some problems. Like, what are just some basic steps or thoughts people can consider or take to start the journey?
Yeah, and just like you said, every single human being has that capability, and it boils down to, um, is there a willingness or not? And there's zero judgment. Nothing is right or wrong in terms of taking this step. No one, it doesn't have to be, like you said, a huge in depth, you know, I find in my experience, yeah, life is about growth. It will be a lifelong journey for me. And some people are perfectly satisfied with it. Nothing is wrong with any which decision or choice. Um, and uh, we do all have the capacity, the ability to live from an empowered life. That is inherently who we are meant to be. And so what I find is that some people may, start, or they may initially, it can start with a simple discussion, a simple looking at the areas of your life in which you find that you may be experiencing disempowerment, unwanted or disempowered circumstances or situations in your life. Because what I have found, it's not, like we said, I use some extreme examples, right, of certain specific things that have happened to people, but the more common journey is that it's been small incremental steps, like layers of an onion. It's like a boiling point. You don't actually look at, you put a frog in a boiling, it sounds, you know, aggressive, but you put a frog in a boiling pot, it will actually sit there. It won't actually jump out if you are turning up the heat. It sits there and comfortably sits in the continuously burning hot water until it reaches a boiling point. And that's what I think a lot of us don't realize, is these are small incremental, like layers of an onion that have built up over time to where we've suddenly hit a boiling point. Like I said, people say, well, how did I get so far off center? Well, of course you don't see it because it's individual things. So it can be, stepping back into that empowered state of being, can happen and must happen in small incremental daily actions. Just like you said, it doesn't have to be this whole massive, Mount Everest to climb. But what it often is where in your life are you not using your voice in the way you want to? And so, some of the things, from women feeling like and this, I see this one often, but ways women feel like they have to perform in the bedroom, for example. Some of the easiest clients that I have worked with, I've said the words, well, just tell them you don't want to do that anymore. Are you kidding me, sir? I couldn't do that. I get a call the next week. Oh my gosh, you won't believe it. He was fine with it. This is great. Now I'm, and whatever. We have this idea in our head of what we're allowed to, how our voice is allowed to be used, or how our choices are allowed to be made, versus this new, like we talked about, a paradigm shift of, well, what would it look like if I came from an empowered way of being in every area of my life? In my relationship, what would a more empowered way to show up here look like? And one little step. Okay, I've seen relationships completely be shifted, be transformed, be saved, be strengthened, infused with more love and more trust and respect, simply by using the sentence, I don't want you to ever speak to me that way again. Right? So it's little things that have got up to, over time, where we've just realized, well, we feel we don't know what to do, as opposed to, okay, well, what's just one step in front of the other.
That is useful. Those are really useful suggestions and tips and insights. Absolutely. Very important. I always end my podcast with a question, if we're at that place, Sarah, where I ask, and I'll ask now, which television show, new or old, do you recommend and why?
I actually don't watch a whole lot of television, but I have my favorite movie, if I can share that.
Sure.
You can, like, I don't know if people can actually find this thing, but you can go on YouTube, and it turns out they rent things. It's a new blockbuster or something. But it's called Searching for Sugar Man. Have you heard that?
I
that
have
movie?
heard of it. I haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful story. It's about a man who, he started doing music. He started a music career. It wasn't picked up. It wasn't well received. He didn't have a home, lived in the street, it just wasn't, it didn't take off the way he had hoped. Somehow his CD got brought, or his album got brought in or leaked into South Africa. And without realizing, his song became essentially the national anthem of the apartheid. And it led to and contributed, it was a fundamental piece, it contributed to the empowerment of the oppressed people, and led to, it was like, again, the soundtrack of freedom for them. And so in one country, he's just considered that, this kind of homeless mess and whatever. In another country, he's just, he's a voice of freedom. He has no idea that, the story, anyways, I won't ruin it. But I find that it's such a beautiful representation of how so many people see themselves when they are living in that state of shame and guilt, right? It's, we think we're the person in the states that, our dreams are, we're not worth anything, we're not whatever, without even realizing there is actually a part of us that's, there's opportunity for freedom, for love, for abundance, for, this is actually how all of us should be seeing ourselves, is in this different light. So beautiful, beautiful movie if you're interested.
It's so beautiful. I remember that movie, hearing about it, reading about it, and it wasn't that I wasn't interested. It was just, probably had a lot of things in my queue at that time.
Yes.
But yes, I thank you for bringing it up, because I will add it back to the queue.
Yeah, brings tears to your eyes. It's such a good one.
I believe it. And it makes the point that we all have something to contribute. Sometimes we have many things to contribute, but just because a contribution isn't received or welcomed in one place doesn't mean that it's not valuable and needed somewhere else. I mean, that can be a literal physical place, or just a different community or different group. I mean, it's such a beautiful message. So thank you for offering that.
And even on that point is, there will always be people who will not see the beauty in you, or the potential in you, or the capabilities, or the gifts. There will always be people who don't necessarily, see this light in someone. And it's that journey of which version do you actually want to choose? Which version of yourself do you actually want to believe? And so it's it brings tears to your eye. Yeah, it's a good one. You gotta check it out.
I'm going to. Sarah, thank you so much again for joining me. I have enjoyed our conversation and your stories and your insights and your experience, and also sharing, even up at the very top, your own journey and moment of recognizing, oh no, this isn't the life, or this isn't how I want to be operating in the world. I've got to make a change. So I'm glad that you recognize that, and that you took your exit and started on a new path. This is wonderful.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. And it was so nice to speak with you. You're doing such important work, and yeah, just so grateful that you had me on.
You are welcome. My pleasure.